A few months ago, I saw quite a few of my peers within the gaming community jump on the bandwagon of making top 10 lists for games of the decade. Whether it be their favorite or the most popular games to talk about in the last 10 years, it was quite an interesting sight to see. That said, I wanted to tackle the same topic but from a different angle. Not just gush about my favorites, but to go on to tackle the games that have left the greatest impact with not only myself, but the people who play games, the genre or category that said title fell into, or even the entire industry as a whole. Hence why I'll be talking about the most impactful games of the last decade. And don't worry, I'm not gonna go and be a massive pleb and shoehorn Dark Souls in a desperate attempt to look cool. Instead, I'll be talking about the realest of real games that have left their mark on the people that play them. And with all that said, let's get started. Over the last decade or so, we've seen the growth of auteur developers, making middle market games with a unique flavor. Unlike some devs that go into the indie scene and embrace a small budget, these devs try to squeeze out a truly unique game in the AAA industry with whatever they're given. That said, while some praise has been given to the Niers and the No More Heroes of the world, I feel it's necessary to praise the Dreamcast's swan song and the most overinflated budget out there in the form of Shenmue 3. A game that felt the need to give us such a unique experience that circumnavigated the AAA space and got most of its funds from fans. A game that stays so true to itself that it never really evolved past said Dreamcast era, and a story that was so necessary to tell that it never concludes the series, despite the fact that the odds of getting a fourth game is nearing impossible as the fanbase is at risk of dying of old age at this point. It's hard to say that any other game will meet the auteur level that Yusuke has achieved, and that is something to marvel at. Over the last decade, many franchises were given a second breath in the form of a successful reboot, since many of these titles were never truly bad, but just needed some polishes and changes to meet the standards of the modern audience. Doom, XCOM, Genesis Sonic, and many others were given the chance to make their mark on the modern audience. However, I feel it's more important if you not only attempt to give people what they want, but go in a different direction and give them something they never asked for. And Star Fox Zero did quite a lot in this regard. With a skill floor that's interchangeable with the skill ceiling of other games, staying so true to the original that there is barely any form of evolution in the aesthetics of the game or the story that the characters go through, and attempting to be the swan song of the Wii U by implementing all of the gamepad's features at the exact same time with no controller options beyond getting a second person to help. Star Fox Zero is proof that innovation can be lost on people because they want things like comfortable controls and streamlining in necessary areas. It's kinda sad that many gamers lack the discipline to play through such a short game multiple times just to get used to such a unique control scheme. For some people, E3 is considered the Christmas for gamers, because I guess people really like looking at the shiny wrapping paper and just guessing what's inside the packaging. And with that analogy out of the way, Sega and Gearbox decide to put a lot of their budget into the shiniest form of wrapping paper for their gift in the form of Aliens Colonial Marines, with an E3 demo that was made from the ground up that looked objectively better than what you get from their retail product. I mean, people usually expect games to look a little bit more polished between the preview and the release version, but Aliens Colonial Marines is running on a different line of thinking. It's not just graphics and animation, but it subverts expectations in many ways by doing things like breaking the aliens' AI with one tiny bit of messed up code, or taking the retro aesthetic to the next level by taking textures from years ago for an, at the time, modern release. And don't worry, for all the hardcore Alien fans out there, they find a way to mess with the canon of the films because, as we all know, hardcore Aliens fans weren't in the target demographic when they were going to make this game, obviously. When Aliens Colonial Marines came out, Christmas just came early that year. From the last decade or so, it's been made abundantly clear that patches and updates are a necessary evil when it comes to making a modern video game. Apparently, it's just business as usual to not only charge $60 for a game, but also add in day one DLC, plus special editions, plus loot boxes, and or microtransactions, as well as everything else under the sun. So expecting a finished game would just be asking too much from these starving artists. The ungrateful gaming masses should be thankful for developers to even bother bothering to patch their games at all. I mean, just look at Activision and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5. The people that worked on that game not only worked on a strict dev time to make a product before the license expired, but also decided to work hard on sending patches that are several gigabytes large so they can send massive chunks of the game through said patches. It's truly incredible how much can be added through these updates, and to see people complain about how this game will be unplayable if the servers ever go down kinda highlights how ungrateful gamers can be sometimes. Usually at the tail end of a console's lifetime is where we see the most interesting games come out. Since they have knowledge of how the hardware works, developers do their best to make the most out of the limited tech to make the masterclass of gaming. And at the tail end of the 7th gen, we were sent on a ride through hell that we won't soon forget. With pulse-pounding action that would make the Arkham games spit take for the quality on display, motorcycle chases that will change how you look at other games with vehicle sections forever, a quite interesting way of showing sexuality in video games that gives BioWare a run for their money, with all the interactions with the female characters truly making this a standout experience due to how natural and realistic it's all portrayed. The ambition is also worth noting because it looked like the entire game was at some point going to be a sandbox, but the developers decided at some point to make it a linear game instead, which is truly a sign of artistic inspiration, and not because they desperately wanted to get this game out before they went out of business. Often, many small-scale developers have great ideas, but many of them never really get the support they need from a cruel AAA space that only wants to sell the same game over and over again. Thankfully, we have Kickstarter, which has become the place for unique ideas, getting the necessary boost to become the next instant classic. And by unique ideas, I obviously mean the stuff we already had, but we got angry because they stopped being made because there was too much of it. Hence, why Kenji Inafune had shown Capcom how dumb they were being by getting $4 million to make a new IP called Mighty No. 9, as well as innovate in areas we never particularly asked for, such as altering the visuals drastically with an interesting aesthetic choice for explosions, challenging levels that are hard primarily because of cheap deaths, and the major new mechanic that involves you running into enemies in a game that still has contact damage. But the height of the creativity shown in Mighty No. 9 is the advertisement that makes fun of people that like anime while trying to sell a game that takes visual cues from older anime like Astro Boy. Through the last decade in its entirety, we've seen many cases where developers and publishers have shown that they just don't get what made their IPs good to begin with. Thankfully, we have fans who will occasionally do the impossible and add their own ideas to the game-making process with community-made mods, and even fan games. In the more bizarre cases, the fans will even pick up where the developers have left off and make the sequel that the fanbase truly wanted to see, with Half-Life and Hunt Down the Freedman. I gotta respect Valve, since they not only let a fledgling studio handle the expansion to the Half-Life universe, they took the next logical step by giving the rights to their most popular series to a bunch of inexperienced schlups that can barely code properly, let alone make a functioning video game. It seemed like no obstacle was too basic for these teams to go overcome, from using pre-made assets without doing much to alter them, relying solely on YouTubers to voice act in their professional game, to not really knowing how level design works in a series about good level design, to using source filmmaker cutscenes in a series that barely use regular cutscenes. But hey, Valve was okay with selling this on their own store as opposed to making Half-Life 3, so it's safe to assume that Gabe Newell himself was able to see the brilliance of this officially endorsed addition to the Half-Life universe. Video game marketing is a difficult act to do, especially since it plays such a big role in the financial success of many titles. Though to compensate for a low to non-existent marketing budget, you can have good relations with prominent people in the gaming community to get word out on your magnum opus, with the hopes of getting a following. The Slaughtering Grounds showed that not everyone can see the brilliance of your work of art, and naturally there's only one logical course of action. Not to take into account what people are complaining about, but instead to copyright the video criticizing your game, followed by suing said person for giving your game flack in the first place for a ludicrous amount of money. Note that people will tell you that this is a horrible hill to die on if things don't go your way. If that happens, just tell them that a mishmash of random unaltered assets using blood PNGs that were basically borrowed off of Google Images, and gameplay that doesn't even function properly to compensate for any of these shortcomings is a perfect hill to die on, and that they are just haters that are next on the ever-growing list of people to sue. Throughout the last decades, many of the big names in the industry have risen to higher prominence than they've done in years prior. Because most of these titles tend to reflect the design philosophy of the people who made them, we see these directors get the same amount of love and admiration as the games that they worked on. Because of this, Fallout 76 is the apex of Todd Howard's design philosophy, where gameplay loops are the only part of the game that matters. Who needs human NPCs to talk to and get quests from when you can limit all of the characters to audio logs, since that'll make more room for endless monsters to shoot at? Also, why make a new engine for the game when you can use the same engine for a multiplayer game that can barely remain stable for a single player game? I mean, with all the time you save, you can give the developers all the creative freedom in the universe to reuse assets from Skyrim for the final boss, because that's what game design is now. Now, some Fallout fans will be happy to note that this game does break the mold and make some changes to the series to stand apart. The big one being that the Overseer in this game is a nice person that treated all of its citizens with respect with no strings attached. It's such a stark difference that you'd wonder if the writer even looked at the other Fallout games before. And if for some reason none of that is good enough, feel free to consult the $100 subscription service for extra features that weren't bug tested properly, and the microtransaction store, which seems to be the most functional part of this entire game. Many of the games in this list have made quite an impact on the gaming landscape, be it through the game design, marketing, how it affects players, etc. But no game has had an impact felt so strongly that it affected the very perception of the medium outside of the gaming community, which makes EA's Battlefront 2 a true prodigy amongst its peers, effectively getting the entire gaming industry on the bad side of Congress by making a component of the game that functions in an extremely similar way to a slot machine being marketed towards children. However, it was a necessary evil that this had to be done. I mean, Star Wars is such a niche intellectual property that a full-price Star Wars game being sold around the same time as one of the films could ever get its money back is such a ludicrous idea. Nobody wants a single-player Star Wars game that has a satisfying beginning, middle, and end. Of course these mechanics were integral to the game, since as of March 2018, they have been completely removed and the game was rebalanced to account for them not being there. So because of these surprise mechanics having sent shockwaves across the gaming landscape that we will never forget, it only makes sense to place this at the top of the list as the most impactful game from the past decade. This has been the Renegade Master, and catch you later. Yeah, later came a lot sooner than I thought. I'ma just make a mini retrospect for some of my favorite games that came out each year of the decade. Why? I don't know. You clicked on this video, so you're probably gonna watch it anyway. Keep in mind, I'm usually playing catch-up with older titles, so that's your cue to tell me what games I should have been playing from 2010 to 2019. And with that said, one of the best things to come out of Operation Rainfall, with an amazing story, a unique battle system, and a massive open world that was worth exploring from top to bottom. One of my favorite sandbox games ever made, and what I feel is the apex of Sucker Punch's quality in terms of a memorable story and fun gameplay. An incredible reboot that was worth the 25-year wait, with a memorable and extremely replayable adventure as well as a great cast of characters. By the way, I am definitely waiting for that sequel. Get on that, Nintendo. One of the most unique games Platinum has ever made that has just the right elements of interesting mechanics, great bosses, and a memorable story. A massively improved sequel to Bayonetta 1 with a smoothened out difficulty curve, a more fun tone, a really fun set of weapons to use, and a damn great lineup of bosses. I'm really looking forward to Bayonetta 3 when that eventually comes out. A solid Metroidvania game with some fun platforming challenges and a jaw-droppingly gorgeous presentation. One of my favorite indie games of all time that accomplishes so much with what little it has. This was a game that I could not put down on my first time through, and I definitely recommend others give it a shot. This is the sequel to Mario 64 that I was waiting the better part of a decade for, and it did not disappoint. This game breathes new life into the Mario series through the new mechanics on offer, and it has so many moods to collect, and it was fun from beginning to end. Marvel's take on the Arkham formula, but with a more neighborhood-friendly protagonist. It hits all the right notes for combat, exploration, and just a fun factor. And yeah, it definitely makes it feel like Spider Cop. A more refined take on Hotline Miami with the same intense gameplay, a fun slow motion ability, a great story that I actually want to see more of in a sequel, and a gorgeous pixel art aesthetic. With all that said, wash your hands, keep safe, and enjoy the rest of April 1st. I'm signing out.